Good evening, everybody. Welcome in again. It's a cold night here in New York City, but I am going to continue my dialogue regarding Lucy Calkins and her units of study, which over 2 decades ago I knew would ultimately fail. I was mandated to implement her units of study, and I despised it. I hated not being able to use a basal reader and a complementary reading comprehension workbook. And I hated that I had to swing my students into being seated in groups instead of rows. I didn't like that they wanted what they called productive noise when I, for decades, had really worked hard to maintain quiet in my classroom. And now I see in December of 2024, there's a major lawsuit in Massachusetts regarding the Lucy Calkins learning model. And many teachers now are becoming vocal about how they too were totally unhappy being forced into using this learning model. You know, as I was Googling around and trying to learn a bit more about her lawsuit, I found some article in, I think it's called Ed Week, and there's this teacher named Brian who added a comment at that website. Apparently he's a teacher as well, and I want to read to you his comment, which I feel is really, really pertinent in supporting my position. Listen to what he wrote. It's about time there was some accountability in this. 40 years of data. This has been since the early 1980s. 40 years of data show absolutely zero improvement in reading comprehension skills in 4th and 8th grade students. Yet publishers like Houghton Mifflin and others continue to promote ineffective, harmful programs that did not teach children how to actually read, but instead how to recite. Enough is enough. As a teacher who is blown away by just how little my 8th grade students are able to read and infer, I welcome and applaud this lawsuit. That's his comment, and it's a recent comment. Now, I have to add that that's his comment. I can't totally support what he wrote because I'm not exactly sure how the publisher, Houghton Mifflin, is infused into the Lucy Calkins units of study. So that's his comment, and apparently Houghton Mifflin is the publisher that has correlated material to go along with her learning model. But what I want us to do now is read to you a letter that I wrote to the New York Sun back in 2004. Okay? It was after I retired, because I retired in 2002. But I became very vocal about the learning model and wrote a series of letters to the New York Sun, and all of them were published. They were published in very prominent places within that newspaper. I mean, they weren't buried within 10 other letters on a letters to the editor page. The New York Sun only printed one letter a day. And it was usually on the 3rd or 4th page, included with an article that was written on the same topic by, I think the writer's name on education at that time was Andrew Wolf. And actually, Andrew Wolf spoke, I think it was at City Hall. I think it was some meeting at City Hall about education. But if I remember correctly, I think it was Uptown, where maybe some representatives from City Hall were speaking. I'm not quite sure, but I know that I was present at a very important meeting. And my letters were being published, a lot of them, week after week after week. And this is one of the letters that I wrote that they published, where I pretty well delineated why I just didn't support Lucy Calkins and the units of study that she was introducing. And I really thought her whole learning model was absurd. I want to read to you now the letter that I wrote that was published back in July of 2004. Let's begin. After I retired, I wrote many pieces on education which were published in the New York Sun. This is one of them. After I read Education by Smoke and Mirrors by Andrew Wolfe, in his opinion piece in July of 2004, I sadly concluded that a discussion of the problems in the New York City schools has jumped the shark. Why did it jump the shark? Because nobody was listening. 22 years ago, nobody was listening to us. It was like talking to the wall. But finally, some progress is being made in terms of pushback. And it's long overdue. In Region 9's third grade Summer Success Academy, the teachers were given a manual that had been adapted from the Teachers College Reading and Writing Project of 2004. Now, that was Lucy Calkins' model. The third grade Summer Success Academy was adapted from her model, and they created a manual. The Balanced Literacy Program consists of a 95-minute reading workshop and a 55-minute writing workshop. In other words, every teacher, in a very robotic and scripted manner, had to implement these units of study. The teacher wasn't allowed to infuse any creativity into her teaching style. It was scripted learning. The components of the program had to include a read aloud, independent reading, conferences, shared reading, guided reading, writing mini lessons, independent writing, and word work. Do you understand how difficult that was to implement? You had to be on the mark at every minute during the school day within this designed learning model with mini lessons. You had to do a mini lesson before you introduced the topic. I also remember that the principal insisted we post on the bulletin boards the aim of every lesson. It was really a tedious process, not easy. And let me tell you, I did not retire a minute too soon. The 2.5-hour block is so micromanaged that it includes prepared dialogue for the instruction of the children. When teachers help students pick a just right nonfiction book, they are told what to say in order to model thinking. I mean, how robotic could you be? It was like the Stepford Wives. The teacher had to stand in front of the classroom and say, here's a book titled My Farm. I've already read a lot about farms, and I don't want to learn more about farms right now. This is not a just right book for me. It's not interesting. What Lucy Calkins called that was modeling thinking. You were modeling the thinking for the students who were going to a leveled library with books grouped by genre and helping them to model the thought process as they selected books from that library. Pick a book. Maybe it was about farms. Look through it. Here's a book titled My Farm. I've already read a lot about farms, and I don't want to learn more about farms right now. This is not a just right book for me. It's not interesting. Modeling thinking. Then, continuing with that thought process, here's a book called Spiders. I've always been interested in spiders. Let me try reading a page. And then the teacher reads the page fluently. I'm used to reading a book with more words on a page and even some harder words. I think I won't learn enough. This is not a just right book for me. It's too easy. That's actually written down in a teacher's manual. And the teachers are instructed to say that to the students under some umbrella of thought modeling within the selection of a book. Well, if you know children or students, what student ever picks a book and says, I think I won't learn enough? The teacher goes through a scripted process and then randomly distributes one nonfiction book to each student. She says, take a look at the book I just gave you. Decide if it's a just right book for you by deciding if it's interesting and checking a page to see that it's not too easy or too hard, a book you can make sense of while you're reading. Then turn and tell your partner what you were thinking. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? They're sitting in groups of 4, and you are exercising so much control over them that you as the teacher are demanding that they turn to some partner within that group of 4 and tell their partner if the book is a just right book for them? You really think they're going to do that? I seriously rage and continue to rage about this learning model because it's so seriously defective and so important that change happen and change within the approach happen quickly. It has to happen quickly. At first glance, the lessons in the summer curriculum may be impressive and seem effectively crafted for successful results. This is part of the letter that I wrote and was published. I'm just continuing to read it. But experienced traditional teachers like me would consider the learning model to be a major farce, and I did. It was a joke. And apparently 20 years later, it's still a joke. Where education has moved into the surreal world of the Stepford Wives. As more time passes, the articles on education seem to have deteriorated into redundant pieces full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. I shake my head in disbelief, and I'm glad I am retired. I signed my name and indicated my location. I am delighted that finally this learning model has a chance of being thrown in the garbage, which is exactly where it belongs and where it belonged 22 years ago when I was still in active service. Good riddance.